Great. Well, thank you all for being here, both in person and online. We really appreciate it. So our second session for documenting the Japanese American incarceration through narrative and data is entitled Giving Back Data to the Community Through Computational Scholarship. And so we are going to be focusing on two case studies on the Japanese American Incarceree Records from World War II. And this is going to be a very different type of project from the one you just heard about. Ours is really focused on digitization and data and connecting data to other data sets. So much more technical. So again, I'm Mary Ailings. I am the interim deputy director of the Bancroft Library. And we're going to have two different talks. The first talk is going to be looking at using AI and machine learning to extract data from Japanese American confinement site records. And this is a project that was funded in part by the U.S. Department of Interior National Park Service Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant, or JACS for short. I am joined on my panel here with Marissa Friedman, who is our project manager on that project. And she's a digital project archivist. I'm also joined with Vijay Singh, who is the AI machine learning lead, who is sitting here to my left. And then Jeff and Brian will be talking about their project as the next talk. So, our presentation, again, explores using AI and machine learning to extract data from Japanese American confinement site records. And this has been a 2-year JACS project that we started in 2019. You'll note it is now 2022. So the pandemic had kind of interrupted our work quite a bit on this project. The WRA Form 26 records, which you can see here on the left side of the screen, are the individual records that were created for each person who was taken to an internment camp or interned. So we have a full, complete set of these records, and Marissa will talk a little bit about those in a minute. I am the principal investigator on this grant. Our previous JACS grants really sought to digitize and publish records from the War Relocation Authority and also personal accounts. Some of those were written with my predecessor, David DiLorenzo. But this one, I wanted to do something different. And so I wanted to see how we could extract the data from the records to do more with that information and to be able to improve upon the data that exists. So our project had 4 goals. First, we wanted to create a preservation quality digital archive of the forms, the Form 26, and to preserve them for the long term. They're obviously aging. We have a full, complete set in the original order, and we wanted to preserve that digitally. Second, we wanted to create a data set of the information held in those records to build a more accurate and more complete record of Japanese American incarcerees during World War II that will improve upon the errors and gaps in the existing data file that currently lives at NARA. That file, the attorney data file, was actually created from Bancroft's records in the 1960s and then eventually was transferred to NARA. But that record was developed in the 1960s, so it has a lot of truncations and problems with the data. So we're trying to improve upon that. Our third goal is that we are collaborating with partners like Densho and engaging with community stakeholders as part of our grant. We hope to expand this kind of co-curation community model to our other collections to help guide our library's ethical data curation and access strategies going forward. And then finally, our hope is to implement tools and methods to expand computational access to our digital special collections in line with the collections as data tenets, which encourage computational use of digital and born digital collections and support ethical access to collections and data. So the project we're going to be talking about today is exciting for both the technical and ethical questions we're exploring. Using machine learning to extract data held within our archival collections is new for us and has proven to be a valuable proposition that we plan to take forward with our other collections. As stewards of data, as the Bancroft Library and as University of California, our positionality overshadows our users and our communities. So this project provides an important opportunity for us to engage outside our own power structures to amplify unheard voices. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Marissa and Vijay so they can discuss the technical work we've done so far.
Hi there. I'll just start by giving a little bit of context for the records that we're working with and what we hope to get from them. So between 1942 and April 1943, the War Relocation Authority, or WRA, used a census type 2-page form known as Form WRA 26, otherwise known as an individual record, to collect demographic, educational, occupational, and biographical data about nearly every Japanese American who was incarcerated in one of 10 WRA incarceration camps. They even had forms for infants. And these intake forms are incredibly rich sources of data. It includes everything from an individual's age, birth date, birthplace, skills and hobbies, health, physical defects, weight, height, language proficiency, education, occupational data, religion, and more. So there's a tremendous amount of information in these forms. They also have a really interesting history. So data from the forms, as Mary mentioned, was coded to early computer punch cards during World War II. This work was actually done by incarcerees. And then at the conclusion of the war, the original forms and a copy of the punch cards were deposited at the Bancroft. As Mary mentioned, the existing set in our collection, which numbers over 110,000, are believed to be the only remaining complete set organized by camp in existence. So in the 1960s, the library worked with what was at that time the nascent UC Berkeley Computer Science Department to transfer that Form 26 data from punch cards onto magnetic tape. The Office of Redress Administration acquired a copy of this data in 1988 to disperse reparations to Japanese Americans. When this work was finished, the file was transferred to the National Archives, who published it in 2003 as the Japanese American Internee Data File. So this data set currently serves as the authoritative research data set. But of course, there are problems with this existing data file. And we're hoping this project can help alleviate some of those problems. First of all, there are issues with the data itself in terms of truncations and errors that were introduced over the course of those many migrations that I talked about. There's also a tremendous amount of data that is just simply not represented in the NARA data set that's available in the forms themselves. So if you look at the NARA data set, there's 36 available fields, but we've identified over twice that many distinct data points on the original forms. So things that are missing include data about an individual's significant activities, skills, hobbies, educational and employment histories, specific geographic addresses, locations, things like that. Some data was also flattened into a predetermined set of values, the one that was transferred onto punch cards back in the 1940s. So if you look at the slide here, you'll see the top is a snapshot of someone's educational history. The bottom is a snapshot of what you might see in the NARA data set. So as you can tell, you're missing a lot of detail about specific geographic or specific educational institutions, dates attended, degrees, things studied, etc. Another great example of this is in terms of occupational history. So you'll see here snapshots on the top, and then bottom of snapshots from an original Form 26 record, detailing everything about an individual's work history, including things like wages. But you'll see here, if you look at what's included in the NARA data file, all of that is missing for the most part. So in essence, we're trying to create a new, more granular data set that improves upon the existing data file and tries to recover a lot of this data at scale. So of course, it is not without challenges. We originally selected these records as good candidates for this project because they appeared to be relatively uniform. They contained structured data, and they were, we thought, primarily type-written. Of course, as the project has progressed, we've discovered an unexpected amount of complexity and variation in the records, which are challenging for machine transcription. And Vijay will talk a little bit more about how they've tried to solve for that. Several thousand forms contain entirely handwritten responses. There's lots of handwritten marginalia and other notes, which is unfortunately difficult for machines to transcribe accurately. There are at least 6 different versions of the form in use. And as you can see on the slide, examples of some of the other issues that have arisen. So content that is obscured, checkboxes where the check marks don't align neatly with the boxes themselves, fuzzy type, things like that. So all of these factors impact the ability of a machine to accurately transcribe content. So to achieve the best results for this, we've had to collaborate really closely with Doxy AI to sort of iteratively develop a machine learning model that's trained to specifically handle the characteristics of the Form 26 records. So I'll pass it off to Vijay now to talk a little bit more about that.
Hi. So my name is Vijay. I'm a recent graduate from the School of Information right next door, and it was an honor to collaborate on this project. So traditionally, how this problem is solved is using either some standard models, which would mean you take the image and OCR all of it, which is optical character recognition, basically transcribing that image into digital text. Not only is it not accurate, it doesn't give you the kind of key value pair relationships that we are looking for research quality data. So if you look at the form, it's a highly structured document. It has keys such as like name, and you want to associate those keys with specific values, like the name of the person. And this is useful so that researchers can one day say, for this camp, what are the names of the people who were between the ages of this and this, right? That kind of a thing is not possible to do with just digital images. You need to be able to extract data from it. Traditional techniques use either statistics or heuristics that are sort of very specific and don't generalize well. And as Marissa already mentioned, there is tremendous variations in these forms. So to us humans, these forms, they look very much the same, but to a machine, the form is basically a collection of pixels. And pixels are intensity values that range from 0 to 255. I'm getting a little bit more technical here, but basically the machine doesn't really see the text. It just sees some numbers, and it has to figure out what it means from those numbers. So more than just a model, what we did in partnership with Bancroft was to develop a custom pipeline. So basically, we explored the data. As any data scientist, we first explore the data, which is called the exploratory phase, where we say, okay, how much variation do we see? What are some good techniques to apply here? So one of the things we identified early on is that the form is very structured. And so instead of transcribing it all in one shot, we identified a technique where we would take the form and identify specific sections of the form. So when we do these kind of explorations, we present an approach, build a small sort of kind of a proof of concept pipeline, demonstrate the results, and once those results are accepted, we start with a pilot and eventually, build the pipeline to work in for sort of bulk processing of data. But there is tremendous iteration here. So for example, when we did the pilot with the first version or with the first camp, we only saw one version of the form there. And when we went on to process other camps, we saw the other variations that Marissa mentioned. We also did not see any handwriting in the first camp. Those came later. In some camps, I think the paper quality was a little, not as good as the first one. The ink had blotted, and we had to come up with some specific techniques in order to improve the quality of the results. So one of the things we had set up initially as an agreement was that we would strive for a minimum of 85% accuracy on a per field basis, except for some specific fields that had challenges because of image occlusion. So you saw there was a blue stamp, which is sometimes present in some of the fields, or there are signatures where some official has signed over some value, and those are hard to get right. But for most of the fields, we agreed to an 85% accuracy. Now, one of the things we did as part of our pipeline is that we use two techniques in machine learning. They fall in the category of computer vision and natural language. So computer vision takes the image and extracts the text. Natural language takes the text and improves it. So for example, one of the things we can do is if you have a handwritten form like this, if you give it to a computer vision part of the pipeline, it would transcribe it as the first line. And you can see that it's interpreting some of the lines as numbers, right? And so, for example, it gets the first three characters right, but then it thinks it's a one dash and another one after dash and a 17 to end. But we know that this is the name of a person, and numbers are not legal in this field. So the second part of our pipeline is to take this data and say what is the best approximation given the specific rules for this field. So for example, we have a per field definition of what is legal, what is not legal, and we are able to post-process or post-correct the vision part of the thing with these advanced techniques. So this would then get corrected to the closest approximation. Now we cannot always get this right, but the quality is generally much better. Another example of this, I think Marissa mentioned this earlier, is that we have some fields here which are not really typed in the sense that these are not values that are filled, these are checkboxes. So first of all, we had to figure out, now the output for this would be, for example, for this field 16, key sex would be either male or female. Now our first algorithm that we developed identified the box and then tried to figure out whether the box was filled or not. Now we after reviewing the data, we found that often the typewriter isn't able to sort of fill the box completely, and it often misses it like entirely. So the cross is, close to the box, but none of it is inside the box. And so we trained a second version of a technique where we customized this a model for this specific kind of fields, where instead of finding the box, we find the cross. And we say, okay, which box is the cross closest to, and then identify that field. And you can see that not only with, we don't have examples here, unfortunately, but not only with typewritten fields, but even when they were hand-filled, people tend to sort of like overextend over the box. So it's not contained in the box, and it's a lot of the values are sort of outside. But with these custom enhancements, we were very happy to see that even these challenging fields, for most of them, we are now reporting upwards of 95% accuracy. And the only places where we struggle are handwritten records, which are highly cursive. And that's the only part where, if you have free-form text, so even there, for example, we can correct a certain number of areas. So for example, there are fields which are locations, and we have a set of locations that we can closely approximate. But I think with that, we'll hand it back to Melissa.
So where are we now? We approached this project as an opportunity to explore how machine learning could be used to expand access to our data-rich digitized collections at Bancroft. And so far, we've actually been pretty encouraged by the results. As Vijay mentioned, we are achieving 95% per field accuracy rates. And then besides that, there's the time and cost savings involved in automating this process. We're talking transcribing over 220,000 pages of documents. And we've been working on this for about a year. I think that, we've been able to achieve those high quality results despite the challenges of the original documents. And then most importantly, we get back structured data in machine readable formats that are more readily accessible to researchers. So you'll see examples on the slide. The top is a CSV file and the bottom is a JSON file. Of course, there's still work to be done. Besides, basic data cleaning and normalization, we also hope to, enhance this data set by linking it to related data sets, particularly at NARA and at Densho, which they'll talk about more in a bit. Also, we have some work to do in terms of consulting with community stakeholders about, potentially sensitive information in this data and how we want to proceed with making it accessible. So I'll turn it over to Mary to talk a little bit more about that.
Great. Thank you, Vijay and Marissa. So one of the major parts of the grant is not just to digitize and extract the data, but also to think about the ethical considerations in the data that we are going to be exposing. There's a lot more data in the extractions that we're doing than actually exists in the NARA data file. And so we want to be sensitive to, the fact that that data exists and what questions we need to address in order to make that available to and to whom. So a part of our work is to, we're partnering with Densho folks. They've been really helpful, and as well as our scholarly communications group. And we're going to be hosting a community advisory group meeting where we're going to bring members of the community in to discuss the records, discuss the data that we are extracting, and talk about ethical access strategies for making that material available, not just the data, but also the digitized forms, which have a lot of information that we can actually extract from the data set automatically that we can't extract from a picture of the form. So there's a lot of issues we were going to talk through with our advisory group. And one of those is mediated access. How do we provide appropriate access? And we hope that this will become a template for future projects. Unfortunately, our community advisory group has been canceled due to COVID twice now. So we're hoping we can now do it just a virtual meeting. This was actually a pre-symposium for that meeting. Unfortunately, we had to cancel it. So just to go over a few conclusions so far. Success in this project has really been built on leveraging partnerships that bring together technical expertise, content and domain expertise, and deep community knowledge. So developing the pipeline with Doxy, creating a plan to clean, normalize and prepare data for publication, and applying our responsible and ethical framework for co-curation of digital archives is one piece of this. But we're working again then with our community stakeholders and bringing together people to talk about the data and talk about the creation of these materials. So these are certainly iterative and collaborative processes, and they represent models that we hope we can bring to other collections we hold that also contain sensitive information. We do hold a lot of material at Bancroft about a lot of different communities, and this will hopefully help us move that forward. The cost and scalability of machine learning for our other collections is a major consideration. Finding records that will benefit from most of the processes depends on a variety of factors, such as the size and quantity of the data set, the content and structure, and as they pointed out very nicely, the consistency. The forms we thought were all the same, not even close. Lots of surprises there. So we'll continue to explore these questions as we go through preparation of data that we want to make research ready. We don't want to over clean data, but we want to have it clean enough that it's useful to a researcher who's not a data scientist. We love our data scientists from the iSchool, but not everybody is a data scientist. So there's a lot of collaborative opportunities. Connecting with the data set Densho is going to talk about in a minute is also another area we want to expand into and start thinking about data publishing. So we have done a great deal so far in this project, but we still have a long way to go. But I want to now pass the baton over to Jeff Froh and Brian Nia from Densho to talk about their project. And I'll leave our names up there real quick.
Hi, thank you, Mary. I'm Jeff Froh, and I'm here with my colleague Brian Nia from Densho, and I just want to thank, first of all, the Bancroft and Mary for convening this symposium and for all the great work that we've been able to do so far for this project. I'm just going to put that right there. So the title of the talk today is Reclaiming the Soul of the Data, and I'm going to talk, and Brian are going to talk about our names registry project, which is an ongoing effort to build a consolidated list of all 125,000 Japanese Americans who were unjustly incarcerated and excluded during World War II. So the title, again, is Soul of the Data. And this comes from a quote by Scott Klein, who's an archivist who wrote a book called Archival Virtue this year, actually. And here's the quote. To the extent that records have the power to incite change, it is through the user who encounters the spirituality of the text. The ability to claim or reclaim the soul of the text is inherent to the receptivity of those who view it. This is a particularly powerful experience for those communities who have otherwise been removed from archival space. So this is really the motivator for the names registry. It's the idea that we are trying to take these records that were created about our community without our consent for the purpose of controlling and confining our community and reclaiming those to tell our own story. So let me just talk just a bit about Densho as an organization. We're a community-based organization that was founded in Seattle in 1996, primarily by a group of Sansei, that's third-generation Japanese Americans. And they were concerned that their parents who had experienced the incarceration directly were getting older and had not shared the stories, and so very similar to many of the things we heard in the first session of the symposium. But also as activists, we recognized that these stories were telling important lessons about American history and showing this pattern that we saw. And then we had a responsibility to share them. So we started really with our oral history program, which was stories directly from the survivors. And we are still conducting these visual histories, and they're still a pretty important part of what we do. But in addition, we began to collect photos and documents and other materials related to the incarceration experience in particular, but also the Japanese American experience at large. And we use a post-custodial model, meaning that we don't hold many of these types of materials. We actually scan them, digitize them, create long-term digitation or preservation masters, digital versions, and then give those materials back to usually the families. But in doing this, we also started to collect a lot of government documents, and things like the JURS project here at the Bancroft have been really valuable in creating very large bodies of this government data that really people haven't looked at before in documents. So as we say, on the heels of this massive expansion of the federal bureaucracy, coupled with sort of the advancement of public administration methodologies and technologies like the Hollerith cards and all of these other sort of, which are the punch cards, and all these other sorts of technologies that came out of, in particular, the efforts of the WPA during the Depression, the government was generating these really vast quantities of data about our community. And this was like the first time that this had been done. So what is our role in trying to reclaim this kind of data? And one of the approaches that we're taking is what we're calling the names registry. So we had really three goals with this. And this is a project that started several years ago under a JACS grant. And we're now not operating under a JACS grant, but it's ongoing, and we're going to continue to do this work. But the three goals really were to improve name description in our archival holdings. And that is really disambiguating the many Japanese American names that are attached to photographs and documents and things like that. To support genealogical research, which is a very important part of many people's interest in the community, in particular in Densho's materials. And then to encourage novel research around the data and around sort of these larger patterns that we might be able to see in these government documents. In short, to reclaim our data. As Mary had mentioned before, one of the very important aspects of this is sort of the privacy and ethics of these documents. So while many of them have been available, like the Form 26, have been online and available for many years, Making it very accessible, making it much more visible is something that we're concerned about. And there's kind of a two-step test here. Usually you look normally at the regulatory and the legal requirements you might have around removing personally identifiable information and those sorts of things. And that really isn't as much of a concern with many of these materials, but it's really the second aspect, which is the ethics of sort of balancing the individual concerns about personal privacy, about family privacy, with community concerns. And some of those concerns often do not match. So there are many in the community who want as much of this material available as possible in order to tell this story and to do the advocacy that we think is important and to make transparent what happened during World War II. But for many, this is, as you know, we've heard before, a deeply traumatic period in their lives. And even for people who are not the direct survivors, but maybe the descendants of the survivors, there may be trauma associated with seeing some of these stories. There also may be things in these records that they were not aware of. And we heard earlier the story about two people who found through a healing circle that they had a close relation or had some sort of family member who they had not known existed. And a lot of that sort of story is also told in some of these records. And so we're very concerned about making sure that we do this in an ethical way. So we're really very happy that Mary's provided and the Bancroft Project has provided some grounding for this in the community advisory group process. And this is ongoing. So now I'm going to pass it along to my colleague, Brian, who's going to talk about the background behind some of the records that we're using to create the registry.
Yeah, so what I was going to do is, talk a little bit about the data that we used, the sources. And primarily, it was sourced from the War Relocation Authority. You can say it was data that was used to facilitate the imprisonment of Japanese Americans. As you probably know, the WRA was formed in March of '42, and their job was to administer the 10 main concentration camps that held a total of 120,000 people who were forcibly removed from the West Coast. There's a picture of the director of the WRA for most of its life, Dylan Meyer, who was, like many of the top officials of the WRA, came from other federal agencies. He came from the Department of Agriculture. There's a lot to say about the WRA. They're fascinating, kind of under-researched, but two things that I'm just going to note in terms of their goals with running the camps, which are somewhat contradictory, right? On the one hand, they wanted to run them as if they were small towns, right, of about 10,000 people, which most camps were in that range. And so, they had newspapers, schools, churches, recreation, even a representative community government, albeit one with severely limited power. And on the other hand, the WRA, kind of maybe in tacit recognition of the true nature of confinement, wanted, so-called loyal Japanese Americans to leave the camps as quickly as possible, right? They were excluded from the West Coast, but after passing through a battery of security clearances, could move to places outside the West Coast, to the Midwest, to the East Coast, to the mountain states, and so on. So they were trying to get Japanese Americans out of the camps at the same time. And as part of the bureaucracy of running the camps, they started these statistical sections, and the statistical data was used towards both of those goals. The Form 26s, which the first presentation focused on, this opening census that was conducted. Look, I looked at some of the contemporaneous documents and instructions, and it seems clear it was used for many purposes, but one of the main purposes was really through the lens of employment. They were really trying to extract this data to best utilize Japanese Americans to do work in the camps to help run the camps. And so instructions were things like, the skills and hobbies. What were skills and hobbies that could be helpful in helping to run the camp? Physical limitations. Well, what kinds of jobs could these people not do? And so it was a way to identify who could be the carpenters, who could be the teachers, who could be the whatever, who could help run the camps. And it was also a way to facilitate the movement out of the camp, right? Because it was a way to match people with jobs that were available on the outside. So this type of data, the Form 26 data, were used both to help run the camps and to facilitate the movement out of the camps. These camp statistical sections used the Form 26 data to create individual files on all of the Japanese American inmates. As time went on, they added additional information from succeeding censuses and rosters on information of Japanese Americans coming in and others leaving the camps. And at the end of when the camps closed down at the end of 1945, they formed these final accountability rosters, or FARs, which were the other key source that we use for the names database. And this is a fascinating compilation of data that includes when people entered, where they came from, and how they exited, and where they exited to, when they exited, and it's invaluable information. Now, some of the issues that exist with these registries. The Form 26 is as thorough as the information is on those. They leave out about 10,000 people, right? Because they were conducted primarily in the fall of 42, and there were 10,000 more people that came into the camps after that, and they're missing from the Form 26 database. About 6,000 Japanese Americans were actually born in the camps. There were a couple of thousand who were transferred over from the Department of Justice system. These were the Issei who were arrested in the early, right after Pearl Harbor, and these were the parolees, quote unquote, who were able to join their families in the WRA camps. There's a group from Hawaii. There are also issues with people who appear in multiple FARs. Primarily, this is the Tule Lake group, right? Who are segregated to Tule Lake, and so appear in more than one final accountability roster, and then just issues with accuracy and inconsistencies. Although I have to say the data is better than one might expect, in part because Japanese Americans were hired to do a lot of this work, and so a lot of sorts of spelling and those types of issues you don't see as much as you do in, say, census records. So anyway, with that, I'm going to throw it back to Jeff.
We're doing a little shuffle here. So I'm going to talk just briefly about how we actually did the technical part of the consolidation. Well, actually, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the slides are here, and I'd be happy to follow up with anyone who's interested. But there were numerous challenges because we had to take these two data sources, and often multiple data source records, and consolidate them together into basically a single record. So what I just showed you there was the process we used to extract the data from the FARs, which unfortunately we did not use machine learning. We crowdsourced this, which took significantly longer. So hopefully we'll be able to leverage something like the algorithms or like the models that are being used in the future. And then our entity resolution process utilized some tools that we built in-house, and I won't go into that for right now. But the key here, and I've lost my arrows. Okay, well, the key here is to create this single coalesced identity. And very unfortunately, can't see, I don't know why the text didn't show up, but this person's name was Masayoshi Sauce, I think it was Nakamura. And this person we have determined as a single individual by looking at his Form 26 record and also his multiple FAR records that are associated with this individual person. And using that, we again create this single identifier for this person. And again, unfortunately, we don't see the text here, but we're using a system called ARC, which is Archival Resource Key, which is in order to create a single identity and a single identity provider for that individual. And so our list in the names registry is a list of all of these ARC IDs with pointers to all of the individual records in both the FAR and the Form 26. And our goal actually is to add other sources of records as well, because there are smaller sources of transfer records, there are records from repatriation that was done back to Japan, and we've got some other records from the DOJ camps where the Issei were held. So the idea is to create this single identifier that we can point all these records at. So along with just providing a way that people can look this data up at our website and using this data to tag information or tag materials within our archives, we're also hoping and have been using this data in other ways. The first, I'm going to quickly go through a few of these. The first is to support data science and education, and we've been working with a group called the Advanced Information Collaboratory, which is headed by the Information School at the University of Maryland. And it's really focused on using taking computational methods and methodologies and tools and embedding them into archival studies programs, particularly graduate programs. And so they've been using our data sets to inform some of the exercises they've been doing with something called Jupyter Notebook. The second is in some of our own materials. This is using the data for digital storytelling. So we have a site called, another website called Sites of Shame, which is a mapping exploration of the Japanese American, of the facilities that were used in the Japanese American incarceration and exclusion. And one of the visualization layers that we support, well, two of them. One is an individual journey of families, and so you can see each individual traced on the map. And this is from data that we extracted from the Form 26 and the FAR. And the other is this aggregate data, which sort of shows people's, how people got to the camps and where they came from originally. And it's a little hard to see here, but we're looking at Minidoka, and you can see that after camp, 64 people ended up in Sydney, Nebraska. And if you click on any of these dots on the map, you can kind of see those communities as they exist. And this all comes from Sites of Shame. I think most importantly, though, is this effort towards community repair. And this is a really exciting project that we are just starting, or we're partnering with the University of Southern California with faculty there. And it's called Ide. This is a national monument based on the names. And the names are going to be in these sort of three different elements, in these three different forms. There's something called Ide Cho, which is the book of names. Ide Zo, which is an online archive, which is sort of a virtual monument. And then Ide Hi, which it means light sculpture. And this is an actual physical installation that will use projected images of the names onto the sculpture itself. So this is all based around a monument that was erected by the inmates at Manzanar that was called the Ereto. And there's an image of this here, which was kind of a Buddhist ritual and served as a center point for many ceremonies, both Buddhist and otherwise, at religious ceremonies at Manzanar around memorialization of the people. So this really, I think, is probably the most important part of the impact of the names. So looking forward, we're looking to have more active community curation of the names themselves, because some of the data sources are wrong. People may want their family members referred to in particular ways. We want to add, again, I mentioned before, more sources of the names, and then also support more use of the names through external integrations. So we've got an API, for example, so that the names data set can be extracted directly from the site and used in other ways. So, and with that, I'm going to say thank you.
So you felt my presence, didn't you?
I did.
Great. Yeah, and I just want to, say that working with Densho, with other people that we've connected with through all of these projects has been really, really enriching for us who work with these collections. This is just one part of our major holdings across many, many different communities and many different time periods. So when expertise like Brian and Jeff's and some of the other people we've met and been connected to, it really helps us do our work and do it much better. So I want to thank our hosts. I want to thank Amber in particular for getting us reconfigured so quickly, and our sponsors, and most importantly, our presenters in both panels. They were really wonderfully flexible through the reconfiguration. Session recordings will be available at some point after the symposium. And again, we have some information on the table there about our exhibit and some of our holdings, if you'd like to stop by the information table. And I want to thank all the attendees. We had basically 100 people attend today, both in person and online. So thank you all for being here, and we'll bid you farewell. Thank you.